joining us on the line, the great one, Mark Levin. Good morning to you, Mark.
Brian, how are you, my brother?
We are doing well, and so, tonight is the big GOP debate going to be seen on CNBC, and we're going to carry it here on WMAL, but I just want to know, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, Donald Trump no longer apparently in the lead in the polls, according to some, especially in the state of Iowa. Do you think that Trump's going to go after Carson? Will Carson go after Trump? What's going to happen?
First of all, what's going to happen is the last star of my show is going to be preempted. That's what's going to happen.
But
now, that said...
he had to get that in.
Look, this is just debate number 3. Do we remember debate number 2 very well? Debate number 1, we remember Megyn Kelly. Yeah. There's going to be 8 or 9 of these debates. People breathlessly can't get ready like it's a baseball game. They'll have their strategies. They'll come in, and then we'll get on to the next debate, The bottom line is this. Jeb Bush, to me, has to make some movement. Everyone can talk about Trump and Ben Carson, and those guys are outperforming what people expected. Jeb Bush is really in the drink, I think. And I don't think there's a lot he can do except hang on. As the field begins to narrow, I think you'll see... somebody told me a couple months ago, and they were really right on. They said, if you look at Trump, if he can hold 25, 30, 32% throughout with a big field, that's big. But once you narrow it down to 3 or 4 guys and you're at that 30, 35%, then you have issues. Mm-hmm. But I'd rather be in his position with these polls now than anybody else's. But after the first, the caucusing in Iowa and then the election in New Hampshire and then the election in South Carolina, none of this is going to matter. And most of it doesn't. My problem is the way these debates are handled. And I go back all the time on my show about the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and you could do it with many candidates. The media shouldn't even be involved. The media is influencing the questions and the outcomes in these debates in some respects. They certainly did in the first debate, and they tried to in the second debate. And my point is this. These campaigns ought to get together, set up their own rules, follow their own rules, decide who's involved in the debates. Maybe you have other debates. The RNC has surrendered this entire process to the media. And they talked about, you guys might remember, all these talk show hosts who were going to be involved as moderators. There was only one, and he had a bit role. So the RNC ought to take this process back. The age of the media being the moderator in these debates really only started in 1960 or so. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to get back to a process where the parties, these are Republican debates. It's not the CNBC debate or the CNN debate or the Fox debate. These are Republican debates, and the media should be pushed out and forced to report on them rather than influence them.
And Mark, to that end, and by the way, it should be noted that there is no better pre-show for tonight's debate. If you want to learn everything you need to know before the debate begins,
you're a good man, no matter what they say.
6 to 8 p.m. tonight, right before the debate, will be Mark Levin. Mark, in general, do you think that this whole process is what you just said, everyone's paying attention to these debates? It's so early still. We're still 100 days away from the first vote in Iowa, and frankly, the Iowa caucuses ultimately don't actually mean much other than, to show who did well in Iowa. Do you think that the process is sort of way too preempted and way too early, and we're not talking about issues, we're talking about polls, and we're talking about personalities instead of what these guys plan to do?
I think most people are talking about polls and personalities, and I try to avoid polls and personalities like the plague. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. Well, whether I think it's too early or not, or you do, is irrelevant. The candidates get to decide. They decide when they're going to jump in and when they're not going to jump in. And if you're an unknown candidate, you're an unknown person, you can't jump in early enough. So, I wouldn't say they ought to be shorter because that would only help the establishment or somebody that gets on cable TV all the time or something like that, or somebody with a big name. I don't really have a problem with this in that sense because I want to really know where they stand and get a sense of the character of the person. But I do think these debates, the media get in between. But let's talk about issues. If there are a candidate on that stage who voted for TARP, who voted for the first GM Chrysler bailout, who voted to increase taxes on bonuses for CEOs, who voted for No Child Left Behind, who voted for 2 stimulus plans, who voted to expand Medicare, would you consider them conservative?
Not so much.
No.
Well, that's Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Now, having said that, I supported him for vice president for 2 reasons. I don't know why some of these pretend columnists get so confused by burping up the talking points that are pushed to them from the Republican establishment. Paul Ryan was on my show. And he's been on my show a few times, not in the last 2 or 3 years, But over the years, he said two things. Number one, he was serious about Medicare entitlement reform, and then he voted for every budget that did not have Medicare entitlement reform. And remember, this guy was a powerhouse on the Budget Committee, and now he's on the House Ways and Means Committee. He's no backbencher. Number two, he said on my show in June or July of 2012 that we can repeal 85% of Obamacare. At least the Congress can pass it and send it to the president. 85% if we take the Senate through the budget reconciliation process. And all that means is the same process Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi used to avoid the filibuster in the Senate once Scott Brown won that 60th Senate seat to prevent them from passing it the legitimate way. He said that they would do it. That was their plan, and they never did it. Now, he was the vice presidential candidate after he said that. He's a powerful chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He is very close to John Boehner. He has voted down the line with John Boehner, and they never did it. And now, because of the budget vote that he cast last Friday, they're proposing these minuscule changes to Obamacare through the reconciliation process. So all of us are following the shiny objects and say, oh, something's better than nothing. Well, what happened to the 85%? And then we get the argument, well, Obama will veto. Well, of course Obama will veto. You know what happens in a democracy? You make your case to the American people. So the next election cycle, you get another president of the United States, and then you use the same process, and hopefully he'll sign the bill. So everything is inevitable, that the left can win, that we're stuck with Obamacare, we're stuck with Dodd-Frank, the borders are forever going to be open. This is what people are rebelling about. When you surrender the treaty clause to the President of the United States, when you refuse to shut down the government, but you're prepared to shut down the country, people have had enough of this stuff. Well, I think there's serious questions.
You mentioned Paul Ryan out there, and he's going to apparently be the next Speaker of the House, and that'll happen on Thursday. But today, apparently, the House is going to vote on this budget matter. I mean, it's all been worked out by Boehner and Obama. What should Paul Ryan do in that situation?
He should vote against it. He said the process stinks. Well, the process is important. We call it a republic for a reason. We talk about the consent of the governed. You can't have one man negotiating in secret with another man, and then you have 48 hours, Congress, to read it and pass it. You and I were left in the dark. We get certain amounts of information. It doesn't go through any subcommittee process, any committee process. We, the people, are cut out of this process, and then I hear the news reports, local and national, a bipartisan deal. Some of these conservatives are complaining about it. Let me ask you a question. If I told you the Disability Insurance Trust Fund under Social Security, there's two supposed trust funds. The general one and this smaller piece is broke in the summer, this coming summer. That's what the CBO says. That's what the GEO says. That's what the Social Security trustees say. Boehner and Biden, as President of the Senate, the President of the United States, have been receiving letters every year from the Social Security trustees telling them that. You know what happens in this deal? There are only IOUs in here anyway. They take the IOUs out of the trust fund, where most of your senior citizens who are listening get their Social Security checks. They move $150 billion out of that fund, put it into the disability fund, and now Boehner says, see that? Problem fixed. I am telling you, according to the trustees of Social Security, this is supposed to go broke in 2033, 18 years from now. And as a result of this bipartisan deal, it's going to go broke 2 or 3 years sooner. Not only that, almost all the savings in this budget are in 2025.
It's a shell game.
It's a
shell
disaster.
game. Yeah.
Any Republican who votes for this can't even be said. You know, they tell us, don't focus on the social issues, right? Focus on the fiscal issues.
Well, there's one right
we're
there.
focused.
Yeah. All right, and they're still messing it up.
We'll have to leave it right there, Mark.
But this is why you got to watch the Mark Levin Show every night right here on WMAL 6 to 9.
You can listen
to it.
Did
I say watch?
You can listen to it
well,
because
I like
it is radio.
Right?
Right?
I like to watch.
Okay.
Good man.
Mark, thank you so much. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Studio.